So I'm going to present from a very unconventional spot. Actually, there's no reason for me not to be up there now that I got this working. But there was some personal cabling issues, so I'm just going to stand in the middle of the room and do a very unusual presentation if you're in front, if you're behind me. Thanks for joining me this morning. I'll just tell you a little bit about myself, other than harassing the FBI if you were in the previous session. I work at Sophos, and I have one of the most awesome jobs in the world, which is I pretty much get to research whatever I find interesting in the labs about half the time, and then the other half of the time I fly around the world and tell everybody about it. It's pretty cool. I don't have to sell anything. I don't really know that much about our products other than how they protect people, because I help develop some of the protection, but I don't like deploy them, so I can't help with, if you're a customer, I can't help you, probably. But I have an awesome job getting to do research that I find fascinating. So you may see I have some props here today for this morning's presentation. I've got a card skimmer picked up for $8 on eBay, which I did actually get a call from the RCMP when I had this mailed to my house. I'm in Canada, I live in Vancouver. I also have a chip and pin reader writer that I purchased in Estonia for $28 to play with chip and pin cards. So that's another little toy I have here. But largely, my job is to do research, write blogs for our blog, which is called Naked Security, come speak at conferences, and I also produce a 15-minute-a-week podcast, kind of trying to distill all the hype in security down to something that you can quickly digest, because we know that something, we did a survey of our customers, and something like 92% of them have no one whose only job is security. They're IT guys, and they also are responsible for the security, or they're, in some way, most organizations don't have the time to focus just a person, let alone a team, on security. So we're trying to find ways to take very complicated security topics and make them accessible to everyone, which I think is really what we were talking about at the end of the panel, trying to figure out how the FBI and Secret Service can do a better job of helping us deliver that information first to us as IT professionals, and then we have to translate it again to try to get it to mom and dad and our cousins and our friends and our families. And our coworkers. So I'm going to talk a bit about cards. I've got a few in my pocket. It makes me very popular with TSA. Traveling with all this stuff across the border frequently, but I've got some smart cards, Steve Ballmer's old ID. I've got a hotel room card from the Mirage Casino in Las Vegas. I don't recommend making purchases with this one. It's a bit suspicious, but I do have some card stock if anybody wants to back up their credit card. I've got some prepaid gift cards, and of course, my favorite conversation to have was, I've got my wife's credit card. I said, honey, which bank is it that's been crudest and meanest to us about fees, etc.? And she's like, Royal Bank. I'm like, excellent, cancel it, I need a prop. So we'll primarily be using this card. It is canceled, but it is a legitimate credit card. And I'll do a little bit of history. If you're not familiar with credit card technology, obviously everybody's heard these stories about Home Depot and Michaels and Sally Beauty and Target, and unfortunately, I wish that was only the problem, right? I mean, those are the high-profile ones that were worth a newspaper writing up, or Brian Krebs decided to highlight in his blog. The reality is we block somewhere around 1,200 of these attacks a month at our customers, and that's only the ones we detect. We know we miss some of them, and we're only about 11% of the enterprise security market. So you consider we've only got a glimpse of about 1/10 of the workstations in the world. So that tells you how big a scale credit card thieving malware is. It hits thousands of organizations every quarter, despite the news suggesting it's 8, and they're all very naughty. And how do we get here, right? Like if we look at a card, the initial problem in the 1980s was, remember those zip-zap machines? You put the thing down and the roller would go and make a carbon copy and then you'd sign the carbon. Guys would dumpster dive and steal the carbons out of the trash, and all you needed to make a purchase was these 16 secret digits that are right on the front of the card. And so that was a real problem for the card industry initially. The other problem was people doing this, making pencil rubbings of cards when you handed it to them, maybe at a restaurant or a taxi cab and that type of thing. So the card industry introduced what was called CVV, or credit card verification value. It's a secret code that's in the stripe, not the one on the back that you're used to using for online purchases perhaps and things, but there's actually one in the stripe as well that's different. So the first thing they did was they put that in there and they're like, who's going to have a magnetic stripe reader, really? I mean, the crooks don't have this kind of stuff. Well, it was pretty rare back then, right? I mean, it was a pretty specific thing to merchants and point-of-sale situations. And not even all merchants had it, right? They still did the zip-zap sometimes. So I remember we used to have a book that the credit card company gave you a list of all the bad credit card numbers, so you'd check if you had the zip-zap machine. Or you could call the toll-free number and check it while the customer waited, because that's a very convenient experience for purchasing. But that was the problem initially, right? And so they introduced that value. Of course, what the criminals did was they discovered, if some people in here probably may not have been born yet, but most of you look like you experienced at least some of the 80s. Remember the Walkman, right? So crooks figured out you could take a circular saw and a Walkman and cut a slice down the front right next to the magnetic read-write head for the cassette tape deck, and you can read credit cards. It's a very cheap card reader. So that didn't last very long. So in the 90s, the card industry, the crooks were able to steal the mag stripes. So now they had all the information they needed to make fake cards, but they didn't have the embossing machines necessarily. They had these, right? I mean, that's not very, you really probably can't walk in many establishments you wouldn't think and purchase something with that. But what you can do is call the 800 number on the back of the Sears catalog and purchase stuff. And so mail order fraud went up because you could use the stolen card information in mail order fraud. So that's when the card industry introduced this CVV2 value, which is the one that is visible on the back of your credit card. And the CVV2 is algorithmically calculated from the number on the front using a triple DES key that each bank issues their own key. So if a bank's key is ever compromised, it doesn't compromise all credit cards, just that series of cards from that bank. And that's how that value is determined, and it's different than the one that's inside the stripe. Of course, now what the criminals do is they put a pinhole camera in the ATM and take a picture of the back of the card when you put it in, so that they can get all the data they need. But that's not always the case. Sometimes they don't have that. We'll see that later. Of course, I didn't need to use my wife's card as a prop. Unfortunately, people are really stupid. This is an account on Twitter called Need a Debit Card, and they retweet all the people that have posted pictures of their credit card and debit cards on the internet. And that there's an American Olympian, Sophos. She's very proud of her Visa debit card she was given in the Olympics, and she's showing it off on Twitter with all the details present. This particular gentleman here isn't quite very bright. He's got pictures of all three of his debit cards posted, and then in his tweet he says that his PIN number on all three of them is his girlfriend's birthday. So I didn't really need to do this, but I kind of did need a physical thing to swipe.
Wait, you're kidding, right?
No. You can check, it's still a live Twitter account, you can check it out. There's like 50, 60 postings a day of people's debit cards.
There are requests for people to post the back, because, what does the back look like?
Well, the good thing is you don't need the signature. Has anybody ever taken like a first edition of The Adventures of Mark Twain to 7-Eleven to see if the Mark Twain signature on the inside, I mean, let's be serious, right? Who's a signature specialist? I mean, you don't need the back, you can just go, although my wife did sign this one. So what's driving a lot of the criminal innovation now, of course, is we actually started getting better. Despite the fact that everybody likes to complain about PCI DSS, the reality is companies were storing your credit card in Excel spreadsheets before PCI DSS, right? We are getting better. It may not be good enough to prevent the target attack or the Neiman Marcus attack or these types of things, but it has upped our game, right? We made it more difficult for the criminals because now we have encryption at rest and we have encryption in transit. So you can't just write a virus to steal the Excel spreadsheet full of credit cards anymore. You've got to get more clever about how you go about this, which is why the crooks have moved on to the stuff I'm going to show you this morning. This stuff used to be really custom, and it was interesting to us. We first started seeing it in hospitality and educational institutions. We saw several large hotel chains that never fessed up to you, that you probably had cards stolen at. We saw a lot of university bookstores and things like that being hit. And it was very narrow, right? It was clearly one gang that wrote a new piece of malware to do this RAM scraping to look for credit cards in memory before they're encrypted, and was one-off hitting people, right? We would see one, and then 3 weeks later we'd see another one, and then a month later we'd see another one. And they were all in the same vertical. It was hotel, hotel, bed and breakfast, hotel, hotel. And then 6 months later they switched, and it became university, university, community college, university, university. It was obviously a gang that was serially going through different verticals and attacking them. It wasn't widespread, and we had some confirmation when Verizon published their data breach investigation report in 2009. Not to contradict the police that were over here earlier, but can. But the malware that they alerted about last week, we've been researching for 4 years. So it's not exactly fresh data. And going back to 2009 was when we first started seeing this stuff before it became more commercialized in the criminal underground. So it's moved on now. It's no longer targeting just particular verticals. It's targeting anything that moves, really. So continuing with my credit card education scheme here, we've got cards. Magnetic stripe card information was defined in a specification in 1967 by IBM. And cards have up to 3 tracks. And those tracks contain different amounts of data in them. So you see track 1 was defined by the IATA, the International Air Transport Association, they can encode 210 bits per inch, so you can store a lot more data in track 1. But in 1967, they weren't that confident in the magstripe readers. And so the bank, the American Bankers Association, defined their own specification that was only 75 bits per inch, because they were afraid the readers wouldn't be able to reliably read track 1 with that much data in it. And so they defined a lower BPI specification. And then track 3 was defined by thrift. It's not used, track 3 is not used in bank cards. So if you compare a hotel room card to a bank card, you'll see how much fatter the stripe is on the hotel room card, because it has all 3 tracks in it, whereas the merchant bank card only has track 1 and track 2, because that's what's used for making purchases. We'll look at this one in a second. So there's pictures of these cards. Amex, I just put this on here. Amex actually has a patent on silver stripes on the back of credit cards, so only Amex can have a silver stripe. And that's track 1 and 2 versus track 1, 2, 3. So let's quickly take a look. Let me open up a text document here, and the screen's a little clipped on the edges, so let me put it down there, and then I'll scan this card. I've got a few fake ones, but if law enforcement is in the room, I don't want to give away all my secrets. There we go. So if we look at what's actually in the magstripe, this particular reader emulates a USB keyboard, so it just spits it in. This is what most of the point-of-sale terminals that have been breached have used, this very same exact model of reader, by coincidence. And we can see the top line, the top line is track 1, so it had the higher bits per inch, so it has more ability to store data. So track 2 can only store numbers and symbols. Track 1 can store numbers, letters, and symbols. So track 1, you see, starts %B. There's actually an ISO specification for the entire alphabet from A to Z that includes all different types of things that can be encoded in cards in a standard way. B is for credit cards. And then you see the 16-digit PAN off the front of the card, 4510. It's a Visa. All Visas start with 4. MasterCard starts with 5. Amex starts with 3. Discover, I believe, is 6. And then you see a caret. Caret is a separator. And then my wife's name, Wisniewski. And then you see another caret, and then you see 1608, that's the expiration date, 2016 August, and then 201. So 201, because this is a Canadian card, I work in Vancouver, and we have chip and pin, and so 201 means chip preferred, but stripe allowed, right? No bank wants to issue a card that doesn't let you go to Disneyland, so we have to allow the stripe to still work. But when I'm in Canada, I'm largely forced to use the chip, because if I swipe in the card reader, in the machine goes, 201, this card has a chip. And this is a chip reader machine. No, rejected, you can't use the stripe, stick the chip in. Of course, this is really dumb if you think about it, right? Because I can change that 201 with that reader right on the table to be 101, and then I can swipe it all day long. So it's not exactly a great anti-fraud mechanism, but it does, I guess, maybe curb some stuff. And then after that, you see 901, which is the bank service code. They don't document what all that means. Down on the end there, you see 838. 838 is the CVV I talked about that they introduced in the 80s. So 838 is the CVV1, if you will. On the back of this card, it actually says 865. So CVV2 is a different value. There's 2 different keys used to encode the CVVs so that they don't match. So if you steal one, you don't have the other. Track 2 is basically the exact same information, except it doesn't have the letters because track 2 doesn't have the bit density to store alphanumeric. So let's go back, now that we know what's in a card. Of course, in the 3rd generation cards, you will, if anybody wants to hear me really go off later, ask me about chip and signature, which is what you're moving to here in the US in 2015. October 2015 is the cutover here in the US to move to chip cards, but the banks decided that you're too stupid to memorize a PIN. And so they decided to go with chip and signature so we can still rely on the 7-Eleven clerk to be a signature expert when you're making a purchase. But that's a chip, it's a smart chip, it's the exact same thing that's in your cell phone if your cell phone has a SIM chip. It's the same thing that's in my badge, it's just a smart card. That's what credit cards use. There's a secure element inside that chip that has a private key, so it uses public-private key encryption. So what, instead of sending your card number when you use the chip digitally signs the transaction. And then the bank looks with the public key to see if it was signed by the private key that's in the chip. And that private key is protected in that secure element, so it can't be extracted from the chip. So even though I can read and write to the chip, I can't get the key. It's actually a computer. When you plug this into the machine, it boots in about 1 second. It has a full Java-based operating system in it. And it negotiates and talks to the terminal, uses its private keys to sign those things. And they can't be extracted once they're encoded into the chip. And of course, tap to pay you have here. I love tap to pay. The bank is all about shifting liability to you. So tap to pay is fantastic because it allows you to shift the liability back to the merchant. Because any merchant that accepts tap to pay has to accept any fraud that's done with tap to pay.
The question, so if that's encrypted with the key pair, is that the main so it could be transferred?
No, because it digitally signs the transaction and that's what's sent. The card numbers aren't sent anymore. Just the digitally signed version of the transaction ID is what's sent to the bank for authorization. So the card number is never in the computer during the transaction.
So it could be both. If you have RAM script and malware on that computer, it's never going to see the card number.
No, it's never going to see the card number or the PIN. That's all done in the, now the devices are being tampered with, which is a different problem. But at least the virus can't infect Windows XP based point of sale machines and steal stuff necessarily from the chip. If I have time, I probably won't have time, but if anybody wants to later play with all this stuff, I've got all kinds of toys with me and we can set out somewhere and I'll show you what's in the chip. I've got the chip reader writer, I can show you all the data that's in the chip, how it works, all that kind of stuff. It's pretty interesting stuff, but the problem here is I have 5 hours worth of material and I have about 45 minutes to talk to you, so I've had to be selective. If you're afraid to tap the pin, don't be too afraid, it's actually quite clever. You'll see that 193 and then the 201 there. Every time you tap it, that number increments by 1. So the bank can see if there's a collision, the card's been stolen. So if somebody steals it from you and it's on 193, they go make a purchase 194, you go make a purchase 194, boom, card canceled. Because they can't ever, it has to increment by 1 into the future. So that's an anti-fraud mechanism. The other thing you see here is 682 and 821. That's the CVV for the chip. So every time you tap it, the CVV changes. So you can't create a strike by tapping somebody's paywave. So it's actually reasonably secure technology. It's still a stupid idea, and I could go on that later, but it's not as insecure as it may look when you got your new card and went, I don't want tap to pay.
But if I see 999, is there room? Are the next digits available?
It just rolls over, I think. The bank knows about where you were in the series, right? The reason those numbers aren't sequential is I'm really bad at taking screenshots on my Android. So if you have an Android and you want to play with tap to pay, there's an app called SquareLess in the Google Play Store, making fun of the company Square, who does the payment readers. It's called SquareLess, and if you've got NFC in your Android phone, you can actually use the tap to pay. That's what I took the screenshots with. All your card data for anybody to see that has an Android. SquareLess. Right, so the malware. We call all of these things, there's lots of variations now, there's lots of different criminal groups involved in writing these things. We call all of them Troj Tracker, because they're stealing the track data off the back of a credit card. And to be honest, with tens of thousands of samples we get, we can't be bothered to name them. So we just lump them all into this category of Troj Tracker. It's stealing track data. Other names you may see from other vendors, Chewbacca, Alina, vSkimmer. Of course, you've heard Black Paws. It's been in the news the last few weeks. Black Paws is actually just another variant of vSkimmer that somebody else named for some reason. I didn't stick it in the slide. The only important one here is Kaptoksa. Kaptoksa is a Russian word meaning potato. And it's a slang used in underground forums to reference stolen card data. So if you Google Kaptoksa, you'll see lots of people talking about stolen credit cards, buying and selling stolen credit cards, this kind of stuff. Why potato is slang for stolen credit cards is beyond me. I don't know Russian that well. I'm Polish and I have a aversion to Russia. They come to visit once in a while, but we generally don't like it.
Stop inviting them.
And how do these things start, right? Like, how does this stuff get on the payment terminals? These are reasonably targeted attacks. They're not super targeted. You could say that things like Target or Neiman Marcus probably were very targeted in those particular instances. Those are more advanced than most of the attacks we see. Most of what we see is hitting smaller merchants. And the 3 main ways that we're seeing it happen are phishing. So lots of phishing with malicious attachments being sent to retail establishments, hoping that employees read email on the same computers that do transactions, which is quite common in smaller businesses. The second way we've been seeing is bribery. This has happened at several hotel chains that we helped investigate where they infect a USB thumb drive and they go in at 11 o'clock at night and they hand it to the clerk behind the desk who's making $8 an hour and they wrap it in a $100 bill and they go, if you could plug this into the PC, I'll be back next week. And they plug it in, infect the machine intentionally, and then the clerk comes back a week later, retrieves the thumb drive with the stolen card data, with usually another $100 bill from what we hear. So $100 is quite a value for a few thousand credit cards. And the third way, and this, I can't name the particulars on this because it came from an active investigation with law enforcement, but we've seen a lot of the criminals in the bigger cases now actually making the malware into an MSI and then using software deployment tools to distribute the malware to the point of sale terminals within the environment. So they compromise the environment, they get admin, and then they use BigFix, they use group policy objects, they use whatever tools are present for software distribution within the environment to just deploy the malware specifically only to the point of sale terminals in the Active Directory. So, I mean, once you're owned, right? It doesn't matter whether you have whitelisting, blacklisting, anti-malware, etc. If they've got admin, you're done. So I'll quickly go through how it works. You probably can't see the tiny print. I didn't know how big the screen would be, and I'm very bad at taking screenshots, but these are disassembled code from vSkimmer, as what everybody else calls it. We call it Trash Tracker. So you can see this is what the thing does. First thing it does, it goes create tool 32 snapshot, tool health 32 snapshot. That says make a copy of memory. So it's basically taking the current state of RAM and just making a duplicate of it. Because if you start messing with RAM, all kinds of security mechanisms are going to kick in and go, you're trying to access some other process's memory, you're not supposed to do that. So it makes a copy of memory, and then it goes to the first process in the process list, process 32 first, and then it comes over here, opens the process, comes over here, read process memory. So it just iterates through the list of all the processes running on the machine, reads their memory, and then checks with a regular expression for credit card data. And if there's none in that process, it moves on to the next one. That way it doesn't matter what point of sale software is running, it'll always get the card data. It doesn't really care. It's not written for particular brands of point of sale software. It does have a whitelist to speed it up, because you imagine you take a computer with 2 gigs of RAM, because the Windows XP machines don't really need more, and most of these are all XP embedded. And so to make it faster, you can exclude things that you know won't have card data. So they've got this whole list of things that are excluded: Service Host, Explorer, iExplorer, Firefox, Chrome, of course, are giant memory hogs. If they're running on a machine, you always see a gig in Firefox, right? So no need to go through that. You're looking for point of sale processes. You can skip those to speed up the RAM scraping and make it a little more efficient. They also try to see if it's me looking at the malware by trying to look for debuggers, sandboxy, any kind of security tools that might indicate somebody's trying to analyze it to make it not work if it's being analyzed. Which this did trip me up, which is why I have this screenshot, because it was ticking me off that I knew it worked at the customer. Why wasn't it stealing my credit card? And yeah, they look for security tools to see if there's a researcher present. And these are the regular expressions they use to look for cards. So you can see there at the top the B. Remember, I want to show it on the screen, %B. So they look for B, and then the digits 0 to 9, between 13 and 19 numbers, because that's the official specification for credit cards. All of yours are 16, but there are cards out there that have more or less digits. A to Z for 0 to 30 values for the person's name, etc. So they're looking for track 1 there, and then down here, they're looking just for track 2 data as well, because either number can be used for a card transaction. If the machine can't read track 1, it's allowed to do the transaction with track 2. It doesn't matter which one is present. The only difference is whether your Starbucks receipt says, "Thank you, Stacy, for your purchase this morning," because they took the name out of track 1 when you swipe your card. They sometimes will use that as a greeting. Yes, sir?
Why do they have lowercase? Because cards only support uppercase.
He's stupid.
Okay.
It's not a very good regular expression. Our guys in the labs who write regular expressions to look for spam all day were laughing. They're like, that's terribly inefficient. It's like, well, you know, they're crooks. They're not the smartest people. Some of them are clever. I don't want to discount all of them, but most of them are pretty stupid. I mean, the password on the malware I'm going to show you for the command and control when we discovered it was pass. Because the password is too hard. And it validates them with a one checksum. So there is a checksum that tells you whether a credit card number is a valid credit card number. If you go to a website, often it's in JavaScript and it'll tell you the card's invalid if you typo. So the bad guys want to make sure that it's not just random 16 digits they're scraping. They want to make sure they're actually card numbers, which it turns out is why Target Red cards were not stolen in the Target breach. It's why Neiman Marcus store cards were not stolen in the Neiman Marcus breach. Store-branded cards often don't comply with the one checksum, so even though they were being used, they didn't get scraped because the scraper was checking to see if they were valid credit cards, and they only stole MasterCard, Visa, Amex, and Discover. And then, for some reason, they do a little bit of OS checking. They want to see what version of Windows is running. They report that back to Command and Control, probably to aid future development of the software. This software does not work in Windows 8, and it barely works in Windows 7 if you need it. So they were probably wanting to see how many victim machines may, you know, if people started upgrading, they need to change the malware to work better on modern operating systems. You also see get OS fitness. This particular sample I'm going to show you only works on 32-bit operating systems. So they wanted to see if the machine was 64-bit because that would also statistically tell them whether there's a shift happening where they need to update the malware. And of course, PCI always tells you to encrypt credit card data, and the crooks know that, so the first thing they do before they steal it is encrypt it. They want to be PCI compliant just like you. Lots of different ways of exfiltrating this stuff. That one there you can see did an HTTP post. This one over here just FTP'd it out because, of course, all of you still let FTP out of your network because you think it's 1998. You probably have IRC open as well, but they haven't tried that to my knowledge. They also use email. So in this case, they actually used the from address of a Gmail account they had created to send to the to address of an iCloud account to store the stolen card data. Fortunately, Apple was quick to jump on that and take care of the problem. I don't know if we got a hold of Google or not, but we were more concerned with where the cards were being dumped than the from address, which was just bogus. And of course, we can tell it was a real criminal because the subject is results with a Z. So,
So we can identify the differences.
sorry?
So we can identify the differences.
Yeah. So some of the things to look for, I guess the buzzword these days is indicators of compromise. One of the things we see in these environments often when they're first compromised is admin tools that you use every day being dropped onto the workstation they were able to get into to start mapping out your network and figuring out what you have. We see lots of cases of them dropping hash dump, PSKill, Nmap, TCP dump, this type of stuff. So if you have, if you're an anti-malware product, or if you have some kind of application control product in your environment and you're not monitoring for your own sysadmin tools, you need to be. Because you know when you're using them appropriately, and if it's showing up and it's not supposed to be being used, it's either a rogue employee who thinks he's Mr. IT guy today, or it's a crook that got in somewhere, because they very frequently drop legit tools knowing that antivirus will not flag them as malware. Yes, sir?
Do you often see PowerShell being used?
PowerShell is becoming more popular now, recently, very much specific to ransomware and crypto type things. We haven't seen PowerShell in card theft, but there's nothing stopping it, right? I think the reason they don't is PowerShell is not present on any of these old XP-POS terminals.
Right. I guess if they move to Windows 7, that's going to be perfect.
Yeah, as upgrades happen, perhaps things like PowerShell will be more common, but right now, this is more targeted than, ransomware is spray and pray, right? Just blast it out to as many possible people and whatever sticks is great, right? Whereas this is specific to retail, so they've tailored it more to the environment that we're going to be running in. And they do this frequently. So this is another sample we have. Folks, you can see here it says dumping private memory for PID blank to blank.dump. And they just use memdump, which is a common forensics tool. If any of you do forensics, you probably use memdump. Again, less suspicion by using tools that may already be present in the environment. So let's do a little demo. Fortunately, I was able to acquire some of the malware from the crooks. And what I've got here is I've got a Debian. Obviously, this isn't Debian, but I've got a Debian VM running in the background. It's your standard LAMP stack, right? It's it's a very old version of Debian because the crooks use the old vulnerable version of PHP. And I had to spend like a day and a half fixing their PHP to get it to run. And that was a really great conversation. I'm in the lab at Sophos in Vancouver, and my boss is like, "What have you been doing?" "I'm fixing malware." "What?" "Yeah, I'm fixing the malware. I want to show people how it works, but it's really crappy." So I have actually two versions of this one. I got one in December of 2012. December 2012 was the first sample, which is this one. I think it's this one. I'm going to mix them up. Let me open this one. It's this one. So you can see when you buy this, I'll show you a screenshot later of the guy selling this, but this particular one was $6,000 advertised in the black market. When you buy it, you get a zip file with these two folders. You get the builder, which is the thing that builds the malware, and then you get the panel, which is the command and control structure to run the back end. And if we launch the builder from the 2012 version, you can see here, not a lot of options. It's called Win32 Spy POSCardStealer.b. And we can see the URL where it's going to post back the stolen card data to. In this case, it's a 109 address, which I think is in Belgium. And it's RC4 is the encryption method they're using. I don't recommend you use RC4. It's a chaining block cipher. It's a bit weak. But the password is Botswana rules. Again with a Z, so we know it's real. And what you do with this is, you set your own password. You set the IP for your command and controller, the DNS you're using, and then you click on the build button. And then what you do is you load in what's called a stub, which is basically an uncustomized version of the malware, and it edits it and customizes it with your config values and spits out the malware. So that was an old one that we found. And then I found another one in December 2013 from the same guy, much more advanced, right? He's added a lot of features in the year that elapsed. We can see now which registry key it's going to use for persistence, the key name, he's got a sense of humor, PCI compliant S card. A mutex, if you're not a coder, it allows the malware to detect if it's already running, so it doesn't try to run multiple copies of itself and stumble over itself. So that mutex is unique to a given piece of software to be sure that it's not already running. Of course, the URL again, where it posts the data. And now we can see the flash drive name. So when I talked earlier about them sometimes bribing employees to infect machines with a thumb drive, that's the name of the thumb drive that if it's inserted into the machine, it'll dump all the cards to. So if you name your thumb drive Cuptoxa 007, it'll automatically spit out all the card numbers in a file called dumps.log onto the thumb drive. So I'll show you the build real quick. You go here, you go build. You go over here, you load the stub. You double click it, and boom, it outputs. It sticks in the front, which is annoying. It outputs a file malware.vir. I guess that's so the crook doesn't accidentally infect itself. It won't run until you rename it. But you can see that there, and then, of course, that's what you would distribute to the victim computers to infect them. So let's quickly run my wife's card through again. Let's open up Notepad. So it's already running on this machine. It's talking to my command and control server in the background. So I just need to give it some card information in memory so it can scrape it. It can take it up to a minute, minute and a half to scrape it because it is a pretty bad regular expression, as the gentleman from the county pointed out. And so we'll just leave that sit there for a second. And it's got to go through, the entire amount of memory I have allocated to the VM. In this case, I think I have a gig in there. So it takes it a second to go through the whole thing and find the stolen card data. We can take a look at the management console. I'm only using Windows XP in this case. Well, the malware doesn't work particularly well in 7. It works all right in Vista, but nobody could really load Vista, so I just stuck with XP. And this is part of the problem, is you don't need to be very sophisticated, right? You spend $6 grand with some Bitcoins, and then you buy this thing, you stick it on your Debian LAMP server in the cloud that you compromise somewhere. It prompts you for a password. When you go to connect to it, the password is literally pass, P-A-S-S. Oops. Am I caps locked? I am caps locked, don't laugh. Well, you can laugh at me. Okay, fine, laugh. So I've only got one bot connected, right? So bot ID number 1, 5.1.3, doesn't know what country I'm in because I have a private IP address, but normally that would show American flags and Canadian flags and French flags and whatever, right? Is the user an admin that's currently logged in? Yeah. What's the username? Sophos. Build ID, a build version of the bot. And then you see 3 icons there. There's a command prompt, DOS-looking window thing. There's credit cards, and then there's a red do not enter symbol. And the red do not enter symbol basically means remove the malware. And as is typical in malware, that doesn't actually work. They don't spend much time on the uninstall routine, funny enough. But it's very basic, very easy. And so if I go here, one of the things we saw these guys doing is they were, to monetize this botnet because stealing the credit cards wasn't lucrative enough, they also were using it to deploy other types of malware after the machines were infected. So they were renting these machines out to other crooks. So a guy would go, hey, I want to put ransomware on a bunch of machines. And they go, fantastic, 50 cents each, right? And they can come into here and just create a task to deploy another binary. So in this case, I'm going to go in here, I'm going to note, BSides, task URL, HTTP, my Debian box, 168.56.2/calc.exe. If you ever have a mass outbreak of calc on your network, you know you've been compromised by a malware researcher. So I'll run that. So the next time the bot calls home to the command and control running on the Linux box in the background, you'll see calc pop up in the tray down there. Because it'll go, retrieve that URL, and then install it. And they usually use that for either bootstrapping itself to a newer version and or using it to deploy someone else's malware for some extra cash. There you go. Just call it home. And if we go back to the front here, oops, not that page. Oh no, thank you, IE. And click on the credit cards, that's how easy it is to get the card data. So I just click that, boom, the text file comes down with an MD5 of the computer's GUID. So that's how it keeps track of them in the database. It's a SQL database. And if I open that text file,
can't speak.
Where did they? Oh, there it is. And there's the card data for my wife's card. So that would be, if this was a real point of sale machine, of course, that file would have how many ever lines of cards that were stolen.
The card and expiration date as well?
Yeah, it's in there. It's all in there. In this case, what it's doing is it's actually, this one doesn't encrypt the stolen card data. It does, it base 64s it and adds it to a URL. So if we go back and look at the Debian machine, if I can find it, which one is it? This one? And we tail our blog. So if we look here at the URLs, so there's my bot, 56.102. You see get API process.php, xy equals, and then this base 64 string, that's the stolen data of the bot calling home to send the stolen data back. It also has the machine name, the user that's logged in, if they're an admin. All the stuff that we can see in the panel is just base 64 code in this case. They're just trying to bypass your IDS or anything that might be looking for card numbers, right? If you've got DLP and you're looking for 16-digit card numbers, this obfuscates it enough. And this traffic looks pretty harmless. I mean, if you see that traffic and compare to what you see for Facebook or Yahoo or other things, it kind of blends in. You wouldn't spot that necessarily in a log unless you knew that you were looking for something that was exfiltrating data. It is a good log analysis technique if you're an incident responder to run logs through base 64 decode, route 13, all that kind of stuff, because most of these guys are really lazy. They don't properly encrypt stuff. They just obfuscate it to get it past your DLP. So if you're responding to an incident, running a set of logs through a few basic things like that and then running it through strings, you'll often see all kinds of stuff pop out that was encoded very poorly in the web streams on your network. So I'll jump back to the presentation for a moment. Let's take a look at this. So this is actually from there's a great French malware research guy who runs this blog, BsidesLA. If you haven't followed it and you're interested in malware stuff, I recommend you read it. I think let's say he won't be getting a job with law enforcement in the future, but I don't think he's actually a crook, but I think he does some dodgy things to get the information that he gets. So, like Krebs, there's some question about his sources. But I found this on his bullet related to the malware I was showing you today, and this is the advertisement from the underground forum where this guy was selling this particular piece of malware, this vSkimmer, where he's bragging about how much better it is than other RAM scrapers that are out there on the market. You can see here is his license. It's $6,000 one-time license, limited time offer, including a cool dumps shop, a place to sell your stolen cards at no extra charge if you buy now. And you can see, only supports 32-bit versions of Windows. What payment methods do you accept? I'll basically take your money any way you want to give it to him as long as it's through escrow. As your niceware called Dexter. Dexter was a very popular RAM scraper at the time, so he's like, no, it's not Dexter. It's much better than Dexter. And you can see on the right-hand side there's a pocket skimmer very similar to mine, except that one's battery operated, so you can run it in your pocket, just load it up with cards all day when you're bussing tables or whatever, and then you plug that in USB at the end of the day, and it dumps all the cards. This one is the favorite, though. We'll play with that one later. This is a website selling stolen card data. You can see that the crooks have clued into the service code stuff I was talking about earlier, right? 101 means it's a Stripe-only card. That's what you have here in the US and Mexico. 201 is pretty much the rest of the planet. So the values of the cards vary quite a bit based on the type of card. Because if you don't have the PIN, a chip card isn't as valuable maybe because it's maybe harder to use that data. Often if a card is stolen in Canada, the fraud will occur in the US because what they do is they'll still just skim it, even though it's a chip and PIN card. Merchants in Canada won't take the Stripe, so they sell it to somebody in the US who will make a Stripe card and then go make the fraudulent purchases here. So you'll see some of the data we have from the lab shows this problem is huge in the United States, but largely because they're still on Stripe, and it's an easy place to pawn off fraudulent transactions using Stripe cards, even if they're stolen in chip countries. Chip cards are worth a lot more on the underground if you have all the data about them. So if you have the postal code and you maybe have the PIN, then they're very valuable. But if you don't have the PIN, they largely get dumped in the US for cheaper to be used here for fraud.
About debit cards and PINs.
Yeah?
So on the previous slide, that's just the credit cards, right?
Yeah, these guys are just selling credit cards.
So when a person processes a debit card with a PIN, what are we saying?
So you have to compromise the PIN pad typically to get the PIN for a debit card. right? So the PIN number is never sent to the point of sale terminal. The credit card machine itself, where you enter the PIN, hashes the PIN with a triple DES key and sends it to the bank. And so the unencrypted PIN data never is in the computer. If anybody ever asks you to enter the PIN data on the computer keyboard, don't. But you'll notice in all these big breaches, debit card pins were not taken, right? So Home Depot, no debit card pins. Target, no debit card pins. They can modify the PIN pads, and I have some screenshots of that later. But most commonly, the malware can't get the PIN. They have to do something physical to get the PIN, typically, or take a picture. Cameras are great for getting pins. If I were a criminal, I would use a thermal camera, and I would put it up in the corner of the ATM room and just let it be. Nobody will notice another camera in the ATM room. Not a guide to crime, folks, but and I'm not saying they're Russian, but they're saying they're Russian. So I found that actually one of the blogs of one of the crooks. I'm like, really? Okay. You can see some of the dollar values here. US with BIN, if you're not familiar with credit card fraud, BIN's the first 5 numbers of your credit card. So this particular card, 45101, would be the BIN. And that means it's a Royal Bank of Canada card, it's a Visa, and it's a signature Visa, which is a lower end Visa. It's not a platinum card, so they can tell if it's a platinum card or a gold card, if it's a business card or a personal card, by the BIN number. So the BIN will affect prices, because if I've got a business card, it's going to be accepted more places with less fraud checking, right? Because if you're on a business account, you're traveling all over, and it's less unusual to the bank to see charges from disparate locations than a consumer's card, where the fraud protection is a little stricter. So that affects the price when they're selling these things. And the countries affect the prices. Again, fraud detection, a Canadian card showing up in Australia might be suspicious. So if you're going to commit card fraud in Canada, you probably might want Canadian cards instead. This is a picture of one of the pinhole cameras that was installed in that green thing in front of the ATM, so they could actually take a picture of the back of the card while you're sliding it in to get the CVV2 and your signature. And then they also use that pinhole camera to record you entering the PIN on the PIN pad so that they could see the PIN number associated with that card. So my advice on these is always give it a wiggle. Like, there's nothing wrong with physically abusing the ATM machine. It won't report you. And you know how the machine will stick the card out and it goes like that? Don't pull it out. Everybody wants to pull it out. Don't pull it out. That's to stop it from being skimmed. The card has to move at 2 to 3 centimeters per second for the magnetic strike reader to work. So the banks intentionally make the card come out slow like that, so the skimmer can't skim the card if it's coming out slowly. And if you pull it out, you're helping the crooks if that terminal's been compromised. So be patient. It's only 3 seconds, folks. You can get it back by cutting it off your lunch hour. These guys are quite proud. The C-Team, their website's still up. They haven't been busted yet. cteam.com. They appear to be in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, somewhere thereabouts. Most of their fraud seems to be occurring in New Orleans, Baton Rouge, and Atlanta. They're quite proud that they posted these pictures. $46,000 in this particular debit card account. This one had 158,000 euros. They're basically advertising about what great stolen data they have to their customers, and they've been visiting. You can see this ATM receipt's from Russia, so clearly it's a Russian-American cooperative, because this particular one, the withdrawal was done at 2200 St. Charles Avenue in New Orleans, about a block and a half from where my wife was born. And the other one over there on the right was from Birmingham, Alabama. So clearly there's an American and a Russian component working together with these guys. Shockingly, these guys use Pinterest to publish and advertise their services. I shit you not, they use Pinterest. So that's where I got all these photos. You can see here where they're selling replacement PIN pads so that you can record ATM pins and that kind of thing. That's kind of old-fashioned. Most of them don't do that. Most of them rely on cameras these days, but these guys are selling deep-old PIN pads. You can see over here some of the stuff they're selling. These are California driver's licenses. This here is an embossing machine that makes the letters stick out and shiny. This is the foil machine that makes the letters shiny with the silver-looking foil and all that stuff. And I think it can do the holograms as well on a little Visa Eagle. And then, of course, some American cash to prove how wildly successful and sexy they are. And this is mostly how they cash out, right? They take it, they go and they buy a bunch of prepaid debit cards at Walgreens, 7-Eleven, these types of things. Then they purchase, they like Apple stuff. Apple stuff's great, because if you buy Apple stuff to launder your money, you get like 90% of your money back when you sell the Apple stuff on Craigslist. People love Apple stuff. It's still sealed in the package. They can usually get 80 to 90% of the original retail value. And to be honest, if you can launder money at 15 points, that's a pretty good business. And this is from B-Sides Austin. This is my 6th B-Sides this year. I was at B-Sides Austin picking up our barbecue for lunch at Rudy's Barbecue. If you've ever been to Texas, Rudy's is fantastic. This is the credit card processing machine for the drive-thru. It's a wooden pipe behind the building with the credit card machine bolted down with some zip ties and an Ethernet cable sticking off it, and a camera up in the corner to apparently record my PIN number. I'm not sure. I decided to go in to pay. Some pictures of these guys. I mean, clearly the marketing for these guys is obviously targeting middle-aged women. They're, the fast cars, fast women, piles of money, fancy Italian tailored suits. That's a Rolls Royce. That Rolls Royce belongs to a Russian. Oh, I don't want to talk about that guy. What's his name? How can I forget his name? It doesn't matter. It'll just set me off. The fact he just got out of prison and now he works for Putin. So, and this is one of the guys that was in the previous screenshots of the card embosser and all that, smoking a cigarette with his. I don't know why he's got all his fraudulent shit there. For stats, so this is no longer about hospitality and education. You've probably figured that out. This is stats from Sophos Labs where we're detecting this type of malware out in the field. It's every industry, and they're almost all equally represented. If you have cards, someone is trying to steal them. It doesn't really matter. They're no longer focused because this is now for-purchase crimeware. So anybody that wants to get in on the game is, and it's not a specific set of individuals any longer. If we look by country, I guess it's good to be in Malta, 0%. That could be because we have no customers in Malta, I don't know. But obviously the US dominates, right? I mean, the use of Stripe cards here, chip and PIN in the UK reduced retail fraud 83% in the first 3 years. That's not to say fraud stopped, it just all went online. Really, I mean, you're just moving it, right? And let's be fair about that. And back to, if you were in the panel discussion that was in this room earlier, it was one of the things I wish we'd had a chance to talk about because I don't think we're doing a very good job of tracking this crime, so we don't have the resources to fight it because traditional crime, if you get mugged, you go call the police. I've been mugged, somebody stole my wallet, right? Somebody rips you off online for $50 with a virus, you feel stupid, you're stigmatized by people going, would you click a link in an email? Nobody calls the cops. People are being ripped off by the millions in this stuff, and it's terrible, and we're not tracking it, so we don't even know what's happening.
Why is Japan 0 and why is it Russia on here?
We don't have any customers in Russia to speak of. This is customer data from us where we're detecting things, so it is skewed data. It's not fair data, let me be fair.
Okay.
But let's be fair, the US is not 55% of our customer base, it's about 17% of our customer base. So it is still disproportionately an American problem, but these numbers are not fairly representative of the globe because it's just where we're finding it on our customers' machines. In fact, that's why Germany and the UK, even though they're on chip, are such big chunks of that, is our biggest markets are Germany and the UK. We have more computers that are protected than any place else in the world. And a lot of American subsidiaries have computers in Germany and the UK that were affected. So when you think about a big chain, Walmart, right? I'm not saying Walmart's compromised, don't panic, folks. But American brands that do business overseas will detect this malware on their overseas computers and report it as that country. But it's actually an American chain that was breached, and it was their point-of-sale terminals in Germany or UK maybe that were involved in the compromise as well. So this data is skewed. I'm being honest with you.
The question on the previous slide on the healthcare component.
Yeah.
Was that? Are we looking at pharmacy?
Why is it not letting me go forward or backward? Wow! It's a one-way street. I am terrible at this.
Yeah. That healthcare, 9%. Is that pharmaceuticals or that's actually in the clinics when you walk in?
We would consider our category for healthcare would be clinics of some sort, hospitals, care facilities. I think we lump in health insurance companies into that. But yeah, basically hospitals and clinics. And again, that's primarily an American problem. I don't pay for my health insurance, so I don't use my credit card at the clinic. And what can we do? Obviously, if you're targeted, your anti-malware is not going to block it. If it's this spray and pray stuff that you're buying in kits, we're pretty good at blocking it, right? The reason we have all those detections to give you that data is we do a really good job of blocking it when it's the stuff that's out there that's being sprayed out by the amateurs, right? But the guys that are going after Home Depot are going to know that you're running Symantec or Sophos or whatever you have. They're going to test against it, and you're never going to detect it using that methodology. Like any other kind of security, the same types of things help, right? Modern operating systems. You can't do that kind of RAM scraping in Windows 7 or Windows 8. It's not allowed. The kernel doesn't allow it to happen. You can't make a copy of memory just because you ask nicely. ASLR and DEP in modern operating systems prevent a lot of this from working as efficiently as it does as well. So upgrading your OS really does make a difference. Windows 8 is fantastic. It's terrible to use. I don't recommend it to anyone. But from a security perspective, it's a big improvement even over Windows 7. Microsoft's done a great job at hardening the core of the operating system just the way they need it to. Privilege separation is important. Network separation is really a big part of this too. The firewalling of network segments. Everybody thinks Target was hit because of an HVAC contractor and that the HVAC contractor was on their point of sale network. That's bullshit. It's not true. The HVAC contractor was compromised, and this is where the network segmentation stuff comes in. It was a separate network for their extranet. Unfortunately, it was part of the same Active Directory tree. So once the guys were able to elevate privilege within the extranet, they were able to create credentials in the main directory and then come in a different way. So you really got to, truly separating things is important. And most of you probably aren't willing to separate things to the degree we have to do in the lab because we're working with malware. I mean, literally are air gapped. You need to do the best job you can there because it makes the crook's job tough. They may just move on to someone else. It is a whole game of low-hanging fruit for most of these guys. They're dirtbags and they're just trying to rip people off. So if you're harder than everybody else to break into, they may just move on. No guarantees, but all these things help. Using firewalls correctly, if your firewall is only looking at what's coming in, you're doing it wrong. There is no in. Your employees are on the road, and the crooks are on the inside. If you have a security policy that says, oh, this database is inside my network, it doesn't need to be secured, you're doing it wrong. There is no inside or outside. The firewall is simply an artificial checkpoint. It's a checkpoint Charlie you dropped in the road and said, I want to see what's crossing this barrier, both directions. Right? And you need to put as many of those in throughout your network as you possibly can, because you need to be looking at what's going out, because your intellectual property is going out while you're worried about what you're blocking coming in. And you really got to look at that stuff closely. I'm trying, it sounds like I'm lecturing, that's neat. So that's my talk today. I appreciate your attention to your questions. I'm probably out of time for a lot more questions, but when they boot me, I will go outside if anybody wants to chat some more. Yes, sir.
But for point of sale terminals, isn't whitelisting a really good method because you're really limited at what you're running?
Whitelisting seems like a brilliant idea until your admin is pwned and they sign the malware with your whitelisting tool. It happens all the time. We see it. Bitdefender, or Bit9, is it? Bit9. Yeah, Bit9 is a whitelisting one we see in a lot of environments, in point of sale and manufacturing, that kind of stuff. And we still see malware infections. They just sign the malware with the whitelisting tool as if it's an internal app. Because once you've got admin compromise, all bets are off. It is another great deterrent, though, right? An average crook who's just looking for a willing retail victim that's running a pizza shop or a flower shop or something.
The plugging in, it's going to prevent that. Where you just plug in the USB stick.
Yeah, the USB stick thing's hard to defend against. Again, with Windows XP, if it's not fully up to date, as the gentleman on the panel was talking about earlier, like getting everybody up to date, the guy from the Secret Service was saying. We still see customers all the time that have auto run for USB still on their XP machines. It's like Microsoft released an update 2 years ago to turn that off, just to prevent this kind of thing, right? But if you've got a malicious employee, he's still going to double-click the malware, right? Like, you don't need auto run. If you're paying him to, if he's taking a bribe, then all bets are off, right? Any other questions? Cool. Thanks for your time, folks. Enjoy lunch.